74-year-old Walter Harrison sat patiently in the bustling JFK airport, his hands gripping the small suitcase resting on his lap. His heart fluttered with excitement. After 2 long years, he was finally flying to Los Angeles to see his granddaughter, Lily. He had missed her birthdays, her school performances, and countless bedtime stories over video calls. But now, he would be there in person, and nothing could dampen his spirits. As his boarding group was called, Walter stood up, adjusting his worn but well-kept jacket. He moved with the careful steps of someone whose body no longer had the agility it once did, but his spirit remained strong. He handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, who smiled warmly. "Have a great flight, Mr. Harrison." Walter nodded, stepping onto the jet bridge. The smell of coffee, mixed with the faint scent of airline upholstery, greeted him as he entered the plane. The aisle was crowded with passengers settling in, stowing their bags and adjusting their seats. He slowly maneuvered his way to seat 14B, right next to the window, just as he had requested. As he reached his seat, he attempted to lift his suitcase into the overhead bin. The bag was heavier than he had anticipated, packed with books, gifts, and little trinkets for Lily. He struggled, his arms trembling slightly. Just then, a flight attendant in a crisp Navy uniform approached. Walter sighed in relief, expecting help, but instead of kindness, he was met with an icy glare. "You're holding up the entire boarding process," she snapped. "If you can't handle your own bag, maybe you shouldn't be flying." A few passengers nearby turned their heads, startled by her harsh tone. Walter's heart sank. He hadn't expected this, and he had no idea what was coming next. Walter's face flushed with embarrassment as the flight attendant's sharp words echoed through the cabin. The chatter among the passengers quieted, and he could feel their eyes on him. He had always been independent, but age had made certain tasks more difficult. He wasn't asking for much, just a little help. I'm sorry," Walter stammered, gripping the handle of his suitcase tighter. He tried to lift it again, but his arms trembled under the weight. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Lisa, rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered under her breath, crossing her arms. "This is why people like you shouldn't travel alone." A murmur ran through the nearby passengers. A young mother in row 13 exchanged a shocked glance with her husband. A businessman typing on his laptop paused, looking up in disapproval. The tension in the air was thick, yet no one dared to say a word. Walter felt a lump form in his throat. "I just need a little assistance," he said softly. Lisa let out an exaggerated sigh and muttered, "Unbelievable," before grabbing the suitcase with unnecessary force and shoving it into the bin. The bag landed with a loud thud. "There, happy now?" she snapped. Walter's hands shook as he lowered himself into his seat. He could barely look at the passengers around him. The excitement he had felt just moments ago was quickly replaced by humiliation. Lisa turned on her heel and strutted down the aisle as if nothing had happened. But what she didn't realize was that someone was watching her closely, someone who would soon change everything. Walter sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, trying to shake off the sting of humiliation. The joy of his long-awaited trip had dimmed, replaced by an uneasy feeling in his chest. He gazed out the window, hoping to distract himself, but the words of the flight attendant still echoed in his mind. Meanwhile, a few rows behind him, Sarah Mitchell, a young woman in her late 20s, had witnessed everything. She had seen the way Lisa spoke to Walter, the coldness in her voice, and the complete lack of empathy. It made her blood boil. Sarah wasn't the type to stay silent in the face of injustice. She had been raised to stand up for what was right. Her grandmother, now in her late 80s, had always taught her that respect should be given to everyone, especially to those who had paved the way for younger generations. She leaned over to the businessman sitting beside her. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The man nodded. "Disgusting behavior," he murmured, shaking his head. "That poor man didn't deserve that." Sarah's grip tightened around the armrest. She had dealt with rude customer service before, but something about this felt worse. It wasn't just bad service, it was outright cruelty. Lisa, now busy organizing meal carts, didn't seem to have a single ounce of regret for how she had treated Walter. Instead, she chatted with another flight attendant, laughing as if nothing had happened. Sarah's jaw clenched. This wasn't over. As the last passengers boarded and the cabin doors were secured, the captain's voice came over the speaker, announcing their flight duration. The plane taxied onto the runway, preparing for takeoff. But Sarah wasn't just going to sit back and let this slide. She had a plan. And soon, Lisa would regret every word she had said. As the plane ascended into the sky, Sarah couldn't shake the anger bubbling inside her. She kept glancing at Walter, who now sat silently by the window, his posture slightly slumped. He hadn't spoken a word since the incident, and that made her even more upset. Lisa, on the other hand, continued her duties as if nothing had happened. She smiled at certain passengers, exchanged jokes with a few businessmen in first class, and completely ignored Walter as if he didn't exist. Sarah wasn't going to let that slide. She pulled out her phone and began typing a note. To anyone sitting near row 14, "Did you see what just happened? That flight attendant was completely out of line. This kind of behavior shouldn't be tolerated. If you're willing to speak up, let's do something about it." Carefully, she turned to the woman next to her, a middle-aged mother traveling with her son. "Hey," she whispered, "did you see how she treated that elderly man?" The woman nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It was awful." Sarah showed her the note on her phone. "Pass this around. Let's make sure people see it." The woman read it, then passed Sarah's phone to her husband. Within minutes, the note had circulated through several rows. People started whispering, nodding, and exchanging looks of agreement. Lisa, completely unaware, continued pushing the beverage cart down the aisle, her tone chipper as she served drinks. But what she didn't realize was that she had already lost the respect of half the passengers on board. Sarah had ignited a silent rebellion, and soon it was going to get much louder. As Lisa continued serving drinks, the atmosphere in the cabin subtly shifted. Passengers exchanged glances, whispered among themselves, and cast disapproving looks in Lisa's direction. Some had witnessed the incident firsthand, while others had read Sarah's message and felt outraged. Walter, still sitting quietly by the window, had no idea that a movement was forming on his behalf. He simply stared outside, trying to focus on the excitement of seeing his granddaughter rather than the humiliation he had just endured. Sarah watched Lisa closely, waiting for the right moment to strike. But before she could say anything, an older gentleman across the aisle, dressed in a sharp gray suit, cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me, miss," he called, addressing Lisa as she poured coffee for another passenger. Lisa turned, an irritated look flashing across her face. "Yes?" "I couldn't help but notice the way you spoke to that elderly man earlier," he said, nodding toward Walter. His voice was calm but firm, demanding attention. Lisa's expression flickered with unease for just a second before she forced a smile. "I was just doing my job, sir." The businessman raised an eyebrow. "Your job includes humiliating passengers?" A ripple of agreement spread through the rows. Another woman, sitting 2 seats ahead, turned around. "I saw it too. It was completely uncalled for." Lisa's face hardened. "I don't know what you all think you saw, but I didn't do anything wrong." Sarah finally spoke up, her voice loud and clear. "You made an elderly man feel like a burden just because he asked for help. That's unacceptable." Lisa scoffed. "Oh, please. It's not my fault if people can't handle their own luggage." The tension in the cabin was now undeniable. More and more passengers joined in, shaking their heads, whispering among themselves. Phones had started recording. Lisa was losing control of the situation fast, and what she didn't know was that the most important passenger on the plane had just witnessed everything. As the murmurs in the cabin grew louder, Lisa's confidence began to falter. She had expected people to forget about the incident. Passengers usually kept to themselves. But now eyes were on her, judgment clear in their expressions. Sarah, along with several others, wasn't backing down. But what Lisa didn't realize was that a very important figure had been watching everything from the first-class section. Sitting in seat 1A, dressed in a tailored navy suit, was Jonathan Carter, the CEO of the very airline they were flying on. He wasn't just any executive. He was a hands-on leader who often traveled incognito to observe how his employees treated customers. And right now, he was furious. Jonathan had noticed Walter the moment he boarded, his excitement evident despite his slow movements. He had also noticed how Lisa dismissed him, treating him like a nuisance rather than a valued customer. Now, as the passengers turned against her, Jonathan knew it was time to act. He pressed the service button, signaling for Lisa. Still flustered from the growing complaints, Lisa approached first class, forcing a smile. "Yes, sir. How can I assist you?" Jonathan set down his coffee cup and folded his hands. "Lisa, I need to speak with you. Right now." Lisa hesitated, sensing something serious in his tone. "Sir." "Now," Jonathan repeated, his voice low but commanding. A few nearby passengers leaned in, sensing that something big was about to happen. Sarah exchanged a glance with the businessman who had first spoken up. Lisa, unaware of who she was dealing with, rolled her eyes before following Jonathan toward the galley at the front of the plane. She had no idea that the next few minutes would change her life forever. Lisa followed Jonathan into the small galley at the front of the plane, still oblivious to who he really was. She crossed her arms, clearly irritated. "Look, sir, if this is about that old man, I don't see what the big deal is. He was struggling with his bag. That's not my problem." Jonathan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, in a calm but firm voice, he asked, "Do you know who I am?" Lisa frowned. "What, some first-class passenger who thinks he runs the place?" She let out a short laugh. "Listen, sir, I have a job to do, and honestly, I don't need passengers telling me how to do it." Jonathan sighed and reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out a company ID badge and held it up. The bold letters on it read, "Jonathan Carter, CEO, Skyway Airlines." Lisa's smug expression vanished instantly. Her face paled as she blinked at the badge, then back at Jonathan. "Wait, you're—" Jonathan nodded. "Yes, and I've been watching everything since the moment you dismissed that man like he was beneath you." Lisa swallowed hard. "Sir, Jonathan raised a hand, silencing her. "I built this airline with the belief that every customer deserves respect, no matter their age, background, or status. You, on the other hand, have completely violated that principle." Lisa's hands trembled slightly. "It was just a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "I was just—" "No," Jonathan interrupted. "You were cruel, dismissive, and unprofessional. And now, thanks to you, half the passengers on this flight are upset." Lisa's breathing quickened. "Please, sir," Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Lisa, as of this moment, you are no longer an employee of this airline. You're fired." Lisa staggered back, her mouth opening in shock. "What? No, you can't." Jonathan met her gaze firmly. "Gather your things. The moment we land, you'll be escorted off this plane." Lisa's career had just come crashing down, and she knew there was no coming back from this. Lisa stood frozen, her mind racing. Fired? Just like that? Her stomach twisted into knots as she struggled to process what had just happened. "But sir," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, "it was just a mistake. I didn't mean—" Jonathan Carter remained firm. "A mistake is forgetting to hand out a drink. What you did was humiliate an elderly passenger in front of everyone. That's not just a mistake, it's a sign that you don't belong in this job." Lisa's eyes darted around, as if looking for a way out of this. "Please," she tried again, "I need this job." Jonathan's expression didn't soften. "And Walter needed kindness. You gave him none." The tension in the galley was suffocating. Lisa could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. The realization hit her hard. This was real. She had lost her job. Jonathan turned to one of the senior flight attendants, a woman named Michelle, who had been silently watching nearby. "Michelle, I want you to take over Lisa's duties for the rest of this flight." Michelle nodded. "Of course, sir." She shot Lisa a disapproving look before stepping away. Jonathan turned back to Lisa. "Go sit down in an empty seat. You are no longer serving on this flight. When we land, security will be waiting for you." Lisa swallowed hard. Every step back down the aisle felt heavier than the last. Passengers watched her, some whispering, others glaring. A few had their phones out, recording what was undoubtedly the most humiliating moment of her life. She kept her gaze locked forward, refusing to look at Walter, but she could feel his presence, sitting just a few rows away. The man she had belittled was now the reason for her downfall. Lisa finally found an empty seat near the back of the plane. She sat down, staring blankly ahead, numb with shock. Meanwhile, Jonathan Carter returned to his first-class seat, but not before stopping at Walter's row. He gave the elderly man a reassuring smile. "Mr. Thompson," he said warmly, "I deeply apologize for what happened to you today. This flight, and any future flights with us, are on the house." Walter blinked, his eyes welling up slightly. "Oh, sir, that's too much." Jonathan shook his head. "Not at all. You deserve it." Passengers nearby clapped softly, acknowledging the justice that had been served. Lisa, still sitting in the back, felt like the walls were closing in on her. Her career was over, and worst of all, she had no one to blame but herself. With Lisa now seated at the back, stripped of her authority, the cabin felt lighter. The tension that had filled the air moments ago was slowly dissolving. Passengers who had been silent witnesses to the humiliation of Walter now felt a sense of justice. Sarah, who had played a big role in exposing Lisa's behavior, smiled as she watched Jonathan Carter return to his seat. She had expected some kind of consequence for Lisa's actions, but hadn't imagined it would be this swift and decisive. Walter, still processing everything, shifted in his seat and looked around. His eyes met Sarah's, and he gave her a small, grateful nod. She smiled back. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked softly. Walter exhaled, his hands still slightly trembling from the ordeal. "I'll be okay, dear. I didn't expect any of this." A passenger across the aisle, the businessman who had first spoken up, leaned over. "Well, sir, you didn't deserve to be treated that way. No one does." Another woman chimed in. "She had it coming. The way she spoke to you was disgusting." More and more passengers began speaking up, their voices filled with support. Someone even handed Walter a bottle of water, while another offered him a snack from their bag. Walter looked around, touched by the kindness of strangers. His heart felt lighter than before. Meanwhile, Lisa sat in silence at the back of the plane, her arms crossed tightly. She could hear the conversations, the murmurs of approval, the way passengers had united against her actions. For the first time, she truly realized what she had done. No one was on her side. She had lost not only her job, but also her dignity. As the plane cruised toward its destination, the atmosphere had completely changed. Passengers who had once been strangers were now talking, laughing, and sharing their own experiences of kindness and respect. And at the center of it all was Walter, a man who had boarded this flight expecting nothing more than a trip to see his granddaughter, but had instead become the heart of a story that reminded everyone on board of a simple truth: human decency matters. As the plane neared its destination, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are in their upright positions. We will be landing shortly." A sense of calm and relief washed over the cabin. The stressful ordeal with Lisa was behind them, and now everyone was looking forward to landing. Walter glanced out the window, watching the city lights below as they grew closer. Excitement stirred in his chest. Soon he would see his granddaughter. He smiled to himself, thinking of how much she had grown since the last time they had been together. Sarah, still seated next to him, noticed his expression. "You must be really excited to see her," she said warmly. Walter nodded. "More than you can imagine. She's my only grandchild. I haven't seen her in almost 2 years." Sarah smiled. "Well, I think you're about to have a much better trip than you expected." Walter chuckled. "You know, when I first boarded this flight, I thought it was going to be just another trip, but I never imagined it would turn into all this." The businessman across the aisle spoke up. "You handled it with a lot of grace, sir. Not everyone would have." Walter shook his head. "I just didn't want trouble. I've lived long enough to know that kindness is always the best choice." Passengers nodded in agreement, appreciating his wisdom. Meanwhile, at the back of the plane, Lisa sat stone-faced, staring blankly ahead. The reality of her sudden downfall had fully sunk in. She wasn't just losing her job, she was about to step off this plane with nothing. And worse, everyone knew. The flight attendants, especially Michelle, kept their distance from her. The passengers wouldn't even look at her. She had become an outcast in a matter of minutes. As the plane descended lower, Jonathan Carter glanced toward Lisa one last time. He had hoped she would reflect on her actions, maybe even show some remorse. But Lisa remained silent, her pride still intact, even in her disgrace. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway. A few passengers clapped softly, relieved to have arrived safely. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He had finally made it. But what none of them knew was that one last surprise was waiting at the gate. As the plane taxied to the gate, Walter's heart pounded with excitement. He was finally here. After 2 long years, he was about to see his granddaughter again. Sarah noticed his nervous energy and smiled. "You're really excited, huh?" Walter chuckled. "I feel like a kid on Christmas morning." The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began standing to retrieve their belongings. But before anyone could exit, Jonathan Carter stood up and addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we deplane, I want to personally apologize for what happened on this flight. At Skyway Airlines, we pride ourselves on treating every passenger with respect, and today that standard was not met." The cabin was silent as everyone listened. "I assure you," Jonathan continued, "steps have been taken to ensure this never happens again. And to Mr. Walter Thompson, I want to say this. On behalf of the entire airline, your next flight, and any future flight, is on us." A wave of applause erupted from the passengers. Walter looked stunned. "Oh my, that's too much," he murmured. Jonathan shook his head. "It's the least we can do." Meanwhile, Lisa sat frozen at the back, her face burning with humiliation. The entire plane was celebrating Walter, while she sat in disgrace, waiting to be escorted off. As the jet bridge connected, the door opened, and the flight attendant stepped aside to let passengers out. Walter stood up slowly, still overwhelmed by everything, but the biggest surprise was waiting just outside the plane. The moment Walter stepped into the airport, a tiny voice shrieked with joy. "Grandpa!" His 5-year-old granddaughter came sprinting toward him, her arms wide open. Walter's eyes filled with tears as he bent down, catching her in a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart, I've missed you so much." His daughter, standing nearby, wiped away tears. "Dad, welcome home." Passengers exiting the plane paused to watch, touched by the beautiful reunion. Sarah and the businessman smiled, happy to have been part of Walter's journey. Even Jonathan Carter, the CEO, stood back and watched, knowing that this moment, the love of family, was what truly mattered. But as Walter celebrated his reunion, Lisa was escorted off the plane, head down facing the consequences of her actions. One man had just experienced a moment of pure joy, while another had just lost everything. And as the airport bustled around them, one thing was clear: kindness always wins. As Walter basked in the warmth of his granddaughter's embrace, Lisa was being led away by airport security. The once confident flight attendant now walked with her head lowered, her steps heavy with shame. The murmurs from the departing passengers followed her like an invisible weight. Some stole glances at her, others whispered among themselves, but no one offered her a word of sympathy. Lisa clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling inside her. How had everything unraveled so quickly? Just a few hours ago, she was in control, barking orders, feeling important. Now she was nothing. One of the airport security officers, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, glanced at her. "You know, I've been in this job a long time," he said, guiding her through a side corridor. "I've seen people lose their jobs for a lot of reasons. But the ones who regret it the most?" He paused, giving her a pointed look. "They're the ones who never thought it could happen to them." Lisa didn't respond. She stared straight ahead, refusing to show any emotion. The officer sighed. "Listen, I don't know you. Maybe you had a bad day. Maybe you've done good things before. But what you did to that man, that wasn't just a mistake. It was cruel." Lisa swallowed hard. Deep down, she knew he was right. But admitting that, to herself, to others, was something she wasn't ready for. As they reached an exit leading to an administrative office, the officer stopped and looked at her again. "You have 2 choices now," he said. "You can walk out of here angry, blaming everyone else, or," he crossed his arms, "you can learn from this. Because if you don't, this won't be the last time you fall." Lisa finally looked up, meeting his gaze. For the first time since everything had happened, she felt a flicker of doubt about the way she had treated Walter. Had she really been that heartless? Meanwhile, back in the main terminal, Walter was still surrounded by his family. His granddaughter, clutching his hand tightly, refused to let go, as if afraid he might disappear again. Sarah and a few other passengers who had witnessed everything smiled at the heartwarming scene. "It's nice to see some justice in the world," Sarah remarked. The businessman nodded, and a reminder that how we treat people always matters. Jonathan Carter, watching from a few feet away, also smiled. Today he had made sure justice was served, but more importantly, he had reinforced a lesson that no employee should ever forget. Respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything. And as Lisa sat alone in the airport office waiting to be formally dismissed from her position, she finally began to wonder, had she just learned that lesson too late? Lisa sat in the cold, sterile airport office, staring blankly at the desk in front of her. The security officer had left, and now she was alone, waiting for a formal dismissal notice from the airline. Her hands clenched into fists as she thought about how quickly her life had turned upside down. Just hours ago, she had been a respected flight attendant, giving orders, feeling important. Now, she was nothing. A sharp knock at the door startled her. A senior airline manager entered, carrying a clipboard. He didn't look angry, just disappointed. "Lisa," he said, taking a seat across from her, "I won't waste your time. Your employment with Skyway Airlines is officially terminated." Lisa exhaled sharply. She had expected it, but hearing the words still stung. The manager continued, "We reviewed the passenger complaints, and we also received video footage from multiple people on the plane. The way you treated Mr. Thompson was completely unacceptable. That's not what this airline stands for." Lisa remained silent, her throat tightening. "I don't know what was going through your head when you spoke to him like that," the manager continued. "But I do know this. Every action has consequences." Lisa swallowed hard. "It was a bad moment," she mumbled. The manager shook his head. "No, Lisa, it was a choice to belittle an elderly man who only asked for help, a choice to make passengers uncomfortable. And now, you're facing the consequences of that choice." Lisa looked down, biting her lip. For the first time, guilt began to creep into her thoughts. Had she really been that cruel? Had she let her pride get in the way of basic human decency? The manager sighed. "I don't take pleasure in firing people, but we cannot allow someone like you to represent our airline. We'll mail you the final paperwork. You can leave now." Lisa stood up slowly, feeling a strange mix of anger, shame, and confusion. As she walked out of the office, the airport bustled around her. People hurried to their flights, chatting happily, living their lives, while hers had just fallen apart. For the first time in a long time, Lisa felt something unfamiliar: regret. Meanwhile, on the other side of the airport, Walter was sitting with his granddaughter, laughing as she told him stories about school. His daughter sat beside him, holding his hand. Despite everything that had happened, Walter felt nothing but gratitude. He had been humiliated, yes, but in the end, kindness and justice had won. And as Lisa exited the airport in silence, she couldn't shake the thought, would she ever get a second chance? Lisa stepped outside the airport, the cool breeze hitting her face as she tried to process everything. She had no job, no plan, no idea what to do next. Her phone buzzed, a message from her friend. "What happened? People are talking about you being fired. Call me!" Lisa groaned. The last thing she wanted was to explain herself, but she knew the news would spread fast. Airline gossip traveled quicker than a jet at full speed. She shoved her phone back into her pocket and started walking. For the first time in years, she wasn't wearing her uniform. No polished badge, no airline authority. She was just Lisa. And suddenly, she realized something that made her stomach twist. She had built her entire identity around this job. Without it, who was she? As she walked toward the airport parking lot, she noticed a coffee shop nearby. She hadn't eaten all day, so she went inside and ordered a simple black coffee. The barista, a young woman with a friendly smile, handed her the cup. "Rough day?" she asked. Lisa hesitated, then sighed. "You have no idea." The barista chuckled. "I work customer service. Trust me, I have some idea." Lisa smirked. Fair point. As she sat at a small table, staring into her coffee, she thought about Walter, about the way he had looked at her, not just hurt, but disappointed. That man had done nothing to deserve her cruelty. She had let her stress, her ego, and her own issues turn her into someone she didn't even recognize. She pulled out her phone and searched for Walter's name. Maybe he was on social media. Maybe she could apologize. But after a few minutes of searching, she sighed. Nothing. Even if she wanted to make things right, how could she? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was from Skyway Airlines HR. "Final employment documents attached. Your termination is now official. If you wish to appeal, you may submit a formal request." Lisa stared at the message. Appeal? Would that even be worth it? She had spent years climbing the ranks, treating her job like a badge of power. But in the end, she had been humbled in the worst possible way. And now, she had to figure out what came next. For the first time in a long time, Lisa had to start over. Lisa sat in the coffee shop, staring at her phone screen. The official termination notice felt like a final nail in the coffin of her career. Her pride told her to fight it, to appeal, to blame someone else. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had done this to herself. She exhaled sharply and took a sip of her coffee, her mind racing. For years, she had prided herself on being a no-nonsense, take-control kind of person. She thought authority meant power, and power meant respect. But now, sitting in a quiet cafe with nothing to show for her career, she realized she had misunderstood everything. Respect wasn't demanded, it was earned, and she had lost it, not just from her employers, but from herself. Her eyes flicked to the people around her. A father helping his young son stir a cup of hot chocolate, a tired flight attendant, still in uniform, laughing with her coworker, an elderly woman struggling to lift her shopping bag onto a chair. Lisa watched as a young man immediately stood up to help the elderly woman. He smiled, she thanked him, and life moved on. That's what she should have done for Walter. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had failed, not just as a flight attendant, but as a human being. Her fingers hovered over her phone screen as she debated her next move. She could walk away from this, pretend it never happened, move on with her life. Or she could try to make things right. But how? She had no way of reaching Walter, no way to undo the humiliation she had caused. Then an idea struck her. She quickly opened her phone and started typing. To Skyway Airlines management, I don't expect to get my job back. I don't deserve to. But I do want to make amends. Please help me contact Mr. Walter Thompson. I owe him an apology. She hesitated, then hit send. For the first time all day, Lisa felt a small sense of relief. She didn't know if Walter would ever forgive her, but at least for the first time she was trying to do the right thing. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward changing for the better. Lisa didn't expect a quick response. If anything, she doubted she'd get one at all. But less than an hour after sending the email, her phone vibrated. Skyway Airlines HR your request. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the email. Dear Miss Parker, we appreciate your message and acknowledge your request. While we cannot disclose passenger information directly, we have forwarded your email to Mr. Thompson's family. Should he choose to respond, he will do so at his discretion. Additionally, we encourage you to reflect on the values our airline upholds and how your actions have affected our passengers and crew. We hope this experience leads to personal and professional growth. Skyway Airlines HR team. Lisa exhaled slowly. It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't a guarantee either. Would Walter even want to hear from her? She thought about how small and helpless he had looked when she dismissed him, the pain in his eyes when she embarrassed him in front of everyone. Why would he want to talk to her now? She set her phone down and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in her life, Lisa felt powerless, and not in the way she hated. This wasn't about control anymore. It wasn't about getting her job back or proving herself. It was about doing what was right. Her phone buzzed again, another email, this time from an unknown sender. Subject, about your apology. Lisa's heart pounded. She clicked it open. Miss Parker, this is Walter's daughter, Emma. We received your message through the airline. To be honest, I was hesitant to respond, but my father has always believed in second chances. He has agreed to hear you out. If you are truly sincere, he will be at Maplewood Cafe tomorrow at 10 a.m. You can speak to him then. But I warn you, this is his decision, not yours. Show him the respect he deserves. Lisa swallowed hard. She had expected rejection, maybe even anger. Instead, she had an opportunity, one she wasn't sure she even deserved. Tomorrow she would face Walter, and for the first time in years she had no idea what to say. The next morning, Lisa arrived at Maplewood Cafe 10 minutes early. The small, cozy diner smelled of fresh coffee and warm pastries, but her stomach churned too much to even think about food. She spotted Walter Thompson sitting by the window, a steaming mug in his hands. His daughter, Emma, sat beside him, watching the entrance like a hawk. Lisa took a deep breath and walked over. Emma's expression was guarded, but Walter, he just looked tired. Not angry, not vengeful, just like a man who had been through a lot and was still trying to make sense of it all. "Mr. Thompson?" Lisa said, her voice quieter than she expected. Walter looked up, his kind, aged eyes meeting hers. Lisa hesitated. Where did she even begin? I wanted to say I'm sorry, she finally managed. For what I did, for how I treated you. It was wrong, and I have no excuse. Walter stirred his coffee slowly, not saying a word. The silence stretched, making Lisa's chest feel tight. Then he spoke. "Do you know what hurt the most, Miss Parker?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "It wasn't just the words you said. It was how you made me feel, like I didn't matter, like I was just in the way." Lisa swallowed hard. That was exactly what she had done. "I spent my whole life working hard, raising my family, trying to be a good person," Walter continued. "And in one moment, you made me feel like I was nothing." Lisa clenched her hands together. She had no defense, no argument. "I won't lie," Walter said. "I was angry. I was humiliated. But anger doesn't fix anything. So tell me, Miss Parker, what do you want from this apology?" Lisa blinked. What did she want? She thought about her job, the career she had lost, the reputation she had destroyed. But standing in front of Walter, all of that felt small compared to what she had done to him. "I don't want anything," she said softly. I needed to tell you that I regret it, that I was wrong, and that I'm sorry." Walter studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Apology accepted. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected it to be that simple. Emma, however, still looked skeptical. "You humiliated him in front of an entire plane of people," she said. "You think just saying sorry is enough?" Lisa turned to her. "No, I don't. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I will spend every day trying to be better than the person I was on that flight." Emma didn't say anything. Walter, however, gave a small smile. "That's all anyone can do." Lisa nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. She didn't deserve forgiveness, but Walter had given it anyway. And now, for the first time, she felt the weight of her past start to lift. Lisa left Maplewood Cafe feeling lighter, but not free. Forgiveness had been given, but redemption had to be earned. She had spent years being someone she wasn't proud of, rude, impatient, dismissive, and it had cost her more than just her job. It had cost her respect, trust, and self-worth. As she walked through the city streets, her mind kept replaying Walter's words. "You made me feel like I didn't matter." That was what truly haunted her. For years, she had looked down on people, thinking her job gave her authority, but she had never really understood what leadership meant. Leadership wasn't about control. It was about service. For the first time, she saw the world differently. She watched as a barista smiled warmly at an exhausted mother ordering coffee. She noticed a young woman offering her seat to an elderly man on the bus. These small gestures, these simple acts of kindness, this was what made people feel like they mattered. Lisa had spent years thinking toughness earned respect, but in truth, kindness was the most powerful thing a person could give. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. There was a message from Skyway Airlines HR, subject future opportunities. Her hands trembled as she clicked it open. "Dear Miss Parker, we acknowledge your sincere effort to make amends. While your employment remains terminated, we believe in second chances for those willing to grow. If you wish to attend a professional development course on passenger care and empathy training, we are willing to sponsor your enrollment. Completion of this program does not guarantee rehire, but it may provide you with opportunities in the future." Lisa exhaled. She wasn't getting her job back, but this wasn't a rejection either. It was a test, a chance to prove that she could change. She looked up from her phone, her reflection staring back at her in a nearby storefront window. Who did she want to be? The answer was clear. She wasn't that bitter flight attendant anymore. She was someone who was ready to learn, to grow, and to be better. For the first time in years, Lisa Parker smiled, not because she had power, but because she had purpose. And this time, she wouldn't waste it. Lisa sat in front of her laptop, staring at the enrollment form for the passenger care and empathy training program. A week ago, she wouldn't have even considered it. She would have scoffed at the idea, brushed it off as unnecessary. But now, she clicked the first field and typed her name, Lisa Parker. She hesitated when she reached the section labeled Reason for Enrolling. What was she supposed to say? That she had humiliated a man in front of an entire flight? That she had lost her job because of her own arrogance? She sighed, then began to type. I am enrolling in this course because I failed to treat a passenger with dignity and respect. I let my frustration and impatience dictate my actions, and in doing so, I deeply hurt someone who did not deserve it. I want to learn how to be better, not just as an employee, but as a person. She read it over once. Then again, it was the truth. Lisa hit submit. 2 weeks later. The training program wasn't what she expected. She thought it would be a lecture on customer service rules, but instead it was deeply personal. They discussed body language, tone, and the importance of making every passenger feel valued. They watched real-life footage of flight attendants handling difficult situations, not by exerting control, but by showing patience and understanding. One particular lesson stood out to Lisa. The instructor, a retired flight attendant named Margaret, played a video of an elderly man struggling to store his luggage in the overhead bin. Unlike Lisa, the flight attendant in the video immediately stepped in with a gentle smile and said, "Let me take care of that for you, sir." The man smiled back, grateful, respected, seen. Margaret paused the video and turned to the class. "This," she said, "is how you make someone feel like they matter." Lisa swallowed hard. She had done the opposite, but she was here now, learning, growing, changing. As the session ended, Margaret approached Lisa privately. "You've been quiet," she observed. "But I see you taking notes. What made you enroll?" Lisa hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I made a mistake," she admitted, "a big one, and I lost everything because of it. But someone I hurt still gave me a second chance. So now I'm trying to be the kind of person who deserves it." Margaret studied her for a moment, then smiled. "That's the best reason to be here." For the first time in a long time, Lisa felt something she hadn't felt before: hope. 6 months had passed since that fateful flight, and Lisa Parker was no longer the same person. The passenger care and empathy training program had changed her. It had forced her to confront her past mistakes and given her the tools to become a better version of herself. But redemption wasn't about just learning. It was about proving change through action. One afternoon, Lisa received an unexpected email. Subject: Potential Opportunity, Skyway Airlines. Her heart pounded as she clicked it open. "Dear Miss Parker, we appreciate your dedication in completing the training program. While we cannot reinstate you in your previous role, we would like to offer you a new opportunity as a customer service trainer for incoming flight attendants. Your experience, both positive and negative, gives you a unique perspective that can help shape the next generation of airline staff. If you're interested, please let us know. Best regards, Skyway Airlines." Lisa sat frozen, rereading the words. They weren't offering her old job back. They were offering her something better. A chance to help others avoid the same mistakes she had made. Her hands trembled as she typed her response. "I would be honored." 1 year later, Lisa stood at the front of a training room, facing a group of eager new flight attendants. She could see herself in some of them, the same confidence, the same ambition, but she also saw impatience, a tendency to dismiss the small things. She cleared her throat and began. "I used to think this job was just about enforcing rules," she said. "But I was wrong. It's about people. It's about making sure that every passenger, young or old, rich or poor, feels respected and valued." She paused, scanning the room. "I know this because I failed at it once, and it cost me everything." The room fell silent. Lisa took a deep breath. "But mistakes don't have to define you. What you do after them, that's what matters." A young trainee raised her hand. "So what made you change?" Lisa smiled, thinking back to Walter Thompson, to his quiet strength and undeserved kindness. She thought about the moment he had forgiven her, even when she hadn't forgiven herself. "A passenger taught me a lesson I'll never forget," she said. "He reminded me that everyone, no matter their age, background, or struggles, deserves kindness." She let those words settle. "Now, it's my job to make sure none of you ever forget that." As she looked out at the trainees, Lisa felt something she never expected: peace. She had lost a job, but found a purpose. And for the first time in a long time, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. This story is a powerful reminder that kindness, respect, and second chances can change lives. We never know what someone else is going through, and a little patience can make all the difference. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to Like this post to support more inspiring content. Share this story with friends and family, because kindness should always be spread. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Let's talk about it. And remember, the way you treat others matters. You never know who's watching or whose life you might change with a single act of compassion. Stay kind, stay respectful, and always choose to lift others up.